quick question to the audience. How many people in the audience are investors by reason?
Oh, wow. Significant.
And how many people in the audience are raising money? All right.
The other half. You guys should just, we could just have you leave now and get the deal done. No.
And how many people in the audience have read the book already?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So I'm Shawn Gold. I've known Jason for over 20 years. We worked together. I like to say I met him when he was successful enough to have haters, but not successful enough to be successful. And now look at him. He's got a book. So let's jump into this, Jason. So there's been a lot of books about investment written. Like, why do we need another one?
Good question. If you think about the books that have been written about investing, they typically have been about what's worked in the 20th century, which is real estate and white-collar employment. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Art of the Deal, a lot of the business books that have been written specifically about investing have been either about the public markets and how to be a better trader to get from making a 6 or 7% return to being a spectacular 15% year-over-year returner, or maybe even 20% like Warren Buffett, right? And then the other cohort of books basically said, get a white-collar job, have 2 white-collar individuals get married, and don't go out to dinner, do staycations, send your kids to public school, live frugally, pay down your mortgage, buy a second home, maybe an income property, and eventually if you have enough income properties, when you die at 70, you will be a millionaire. And the problem with, and that's basically the summary of those books.
Yeah.
And a lot of the money-making systems that we used to see on late-night infomercials. And that's going to radically change, and has radically changed for our generation. And we're Gen X, and for the millennials in the room, and for Generation C, the connected generation, or Generation Z, some people call them, people who were born after the millennium. For those people, I think it's going to be even harder. And the example I give is when my parents, my mom was a nurse, my dad was a bartender, and they had a combined income of around $50,000. The cost of their first home that they bought when they got out of the apartment in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, they bought the brownstone, or a limestone as it's called, in Bay Ridge, was $50,000. So it was 1 times their household income. Take any 2, those are blue-collar jobs. Take 2 white-collar professionals here in Los Angeles or in San Francisco or New York City, and maybe they make $150,000 a year each, have a household income of $250,000 or $350,000 or even $400,000. And the average 3-bedroom home for them would be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, something to that effect. In other words, that hack of putting your money into a home, paying it off in 10 or 20 years, it doesn't exist anymore. That hack and that opportunity is closed. Then you add to it the fact that I think white-collar jobs are going to be radically disrupted in the next 20 years by artificial intelligence and machine learning. You have a recipe for disaster in terms of wealth creation. And that's not even bringing into account the obvious blue-collar physical labor jobs that are going away. There are 30 million. What's that?
Robots. Robots
and self-driving cars. If you think about retail and driving, those 2 categories are 30 million Americans. It's hard for me, knowing what I know and what I see from the inside as a technology investor, to think that even 10 or 20% of those jobs will exist in 30 years. They will largely be gone. In the same way, if you wanted to ride in a carriage with a horse, you can do that in Central Park, or you can rent one for your wedding, but generally speaking, the number of carriages and horses that exist today are, historical rather than functional. And so white-collar jobs are the ones that have me really nervous, and wealth creation is not going to work through real estate and white-collar jobs in that combination. If I asked anybody in the room who went to work today and had a harder job than beating the top chess player in the world, how many people feel today was harder, or any day in the last 30 days was harder than beating the top chess player? anybody's job harder than beating the top 3 Go players heads up, or top 3 poker players? Well, your job was harder. Okay, maybe as a parent or a teacher. So there are a couple of good answers to this question. Teacher is one, parent is another, but generally, comedian might be another. Generally speaking, white-collar jobs like lawyer, accountant, doctor, surgeon, these jobs will be easily done better by computers, and those jobs are much less complex than something like beating a Go champion. It's just that we haven't focused the AI on it yet.
Sure.
But when you focus that AI laser, it's going to just annihilate those jobs as well. In fact, I looked at a half dozen companies in the legal space that are making automated contracts. Contracts are a finite data set. So you could easily take out your phone and say, create a non-disclosure agreement between Shawn and I that lasts 30 days and that is based in California and goes to arbitration and has a maximum whatever. And we both would agree to it and be done. You don't have to talk to an attorney. So those kind of things are coming. So I happened to, 7 years ago, start angel investing, and I realized, wow, this is the magical way to create wealth and to move from one station in life to another. I've always been fascinated growing up in the lower part of the middle class and my parents being in debt and not knowing any rich people when I grew up. I was always very fascinated by how people became rich. And you knew me 20 years ago. I had a certain energy to me, spastic or driven, depending on the day, where I just wanted to be successful, and I had to be successful. And I remember you gave me the apprenticeship of Dudley Kravitz on tape and said, watch this. And it was like a movie that hit with me.
You're like, why did you want me to watch that?
Right, and it was because of this predator natural drive I had to be successful, which came out of fear from being poor and fear from not being able to move from the lower middle class up and actually being scared that I would fall backwards. And I think being on the cap table of a high technology startup company is a magical way, one of the few hacks left, for a poor person to become ultra wealthy, for a middle class person to become ultra wealthy, for an upper middle class person who senses they don't have a way to get to that next level to maybe get there. It's not guaranteed, but in the book I talk about how I did it, and I talk about strategies for doing it, and I think it's going to open up to many more people. So the book really is my way of just saying, here's the playbook of how I did it. I invested in 150 companies, 6 of them became unicorns. It can't be luck.
So you don't have to be rich to use this book?
Well, that's an interesting question. No, it costs $29, so there is some weird asymmetrical reason that books are so cheap. I can't understand why it is, but they're one of the best content deals in the world. There is a designation in the United States we have called accredited investor and non-accredited. 95% of the country are non-accredited. We call them civilians in the investing world. And 5% are accredited. We call them investors. And all of these rules were created very long ago after the Depression by the SEC, by the government, to protect people from buying securities in stocks or enterprises that were scams. And the thesis was people are kind of dumb and they just don't know what they're buying. Which was a very, patriarchal, bizarre rule that people came to, but I understand why they came to it. In other countries, anybody can spend their money however they want, including Europe. In most of the countries in Europe, anybody can angel invest in a company. Here, you actually can't do that until about a year ago when they came up with equity crowdfunding. And the SEC, as part of Obama's, oh God, it's so sad to say that. It's part of Obama, President Obama. When President Obama was running the place, he created something called the Jobs Act, and part of it was to say you can invest in startups now so that more startups would be invested, so that other 95% of capital and investors could be unlocked. And so with platforms like Seed Invest and Republic, 2 platforms that I would recommend looking at, I would tell one of my family members if they were considering angel investing to look at. I don't have an interest in those companies. We do have a partnership with Seed Invest where they present at our events, but they're starting to put
so instead of $25,000, $50,000, you can put...
No, those are $500, $1,000.
$500 as
yeah,
a start
so you can
with.
place a very small bet. So in my mind, with angel investing, and I talk about for accredited investors in the book, which are $200,000, $300,000 a year in income for a couple of years, well documented, or $1 million in cash. I think is the current rules for SEC. You can look it up. For accredited, you can either join an AngelList syndicate, Jason's syndicate, my personal syndicate, where I syndicate deals, and you can just draft off of other investors and put $1,000 in or $5,000 in as an accredited investor, or as few as $500. And I think,
seems like, are you missing out on a lot of the fun if you're going that way?
I think it's the best way to start, because you're using these platforms and these syndicates to pre-vet the startups. Hopefully those syndicates are investing amount of money that's reasonable to them. So I offer syndication of every deal I do to the founders, and about 40% currently take the opportunity to do that. And so CafeX, Blockable, a bunch of companies that have become somewhat notable have done syndicates. And I'm happy to do it. We get a little bit of carried interest on it. But really the reason I do it is I like to help the founder, instead of raising $100,000 from me, be able to raise $100,000 from me and $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 from my syndicate for $500,000, which makes us a lead investor. So for your first 10 bets as an angel, it would be wise to play small bets while you learn. Just like if you're going to go learn to play poker and you go to Hollywood Park. When I started playing, when I lived here in LA, I would go play at Hollywood Park, which is at the time, 10 years ago, it was a very interesting experience. People who've been there are laughing. But I'd go there and get a grilled cheese, and I would play at the $1, $2 table.
What kind of players did you play at the $1, $2 table?
It was interesting. That was probably the best part of it. It was mostly retirees, so I'd play with old, Chinese men and old black women, African-American women. It was just like a really interesting slice of life that I would never spend 5 or 6 hours with these people sitting there. I mean, where would I ever get the chance to sit and play and talk to a 70-year-old,
So
African-American grandma and
learning
a 50-year-old Chinese guy who was a chef, and we would be talking about life. It was really fascinating from that perspective.
Amateur cultural anthropologist,
exactly.
And poker player.
But I learned at the $1, $2 table. So if I lost $50 or $100 playing there, it didn't matter. So before you play for big stakes, that's the big mistake people make with angel investing. They have $100,000 to invest. They put it all into the first company they meet. And the first company they meet is the company that the professional angels like myself said no to 4 times over 2 years.
Yeah.
And so you have this negative signaling. If you're just starting out angel investing and the company really wants your money and it's your first investment, that should be ringing a bell in your ear. That's like you're getting invited to play poker with a bunch of professionals and you've never played poker before. Why do they want to play with you? If you don't know who the sucker at the table is, it's you.
Yeah.
And so I think, going very small bets at the beginning is the wise way to do it.
Let's go back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell the endearing part of your life. You kind of see, I sort of hear you talk about yourself as kind of the consummate outsider, but to a lot of people in this room, you're an extreme insider. But what? And I think from knowing you, it comes from that Brooklyn base that you come from. How do you think that? And you obviously didn't go to Harvard, but you're in the middle of some of the biggest deals in the Valley. How did your Brooklyn upbringing sort of help you get inside, become a Silicon Valley insider?
I think that most people in Silicon Valley would rather I have not become an insider, to be candid. It's kind of funny. I think people kind of tolerate me, but being a journalist for many years and building a brand where I wrote whatever I felt was the truth, right? And when I was a journalist, I had kind of sharp elbows, and I was known to,
the unvarnished truth.
I would sometimes, somebody would get hit with one of those elbows, and it built a certain credibility in a brand for me, which was, you may not like what Jason says, but it should at least be raw and intelligent, right? It's going to be candid and hopefully intelligent and well thought out. You could disagree with it, but you're going to know where you stand. And journalism to investing is a really interesting path that a number of really successful investors have taken. And the reason is, when you're a journalist, you just keep asking questions, listening to the answers like Columbo, and just trying to understand, listen, one more thing there, ma'am. You said you cooked pasta for dinner? Is that right? You cooked the pasta? Okay, that's great. Okay, yeah. Because was it? It was a vermicelli, you said? Yeah. Oh, capellini. That's right. My wife says I'm a nudge. Capellini. I got it. It's one thing. You said you cooked the pasta for 15 minutes, but capellini. I looked on the label. It says 4 minutes. Was it 4 minutes or 15? I can't remember. Right? Like he just acts dumb and he asks very basic questions and starts unfolding the mystery. People right now who don't know who Columbo is
sounding like you're from Brooklyn helps.
Exactly. Yeah, it helps with that. And so that's really the journalism was the bridge in. And then once I got in, I kept hosting dinners for people. And I had this little device, which was I would just get at a technology conference a table for 8 people. It was my little hack. And I would always do it at a Mexican restaurant or someplace that I could order a bunch of appetizers and it wouldn't be too expensive. Barbecue joints in New York, I had a great place, Virgil's, I would do it at. Get a table for 8, and then I'd find one person, and I'd say, hey, you want to have dinner, Shawn? And Shawn would be like, who's coming? I'm like, I don't know, maybe just us and a couple of people, I don't know, maybe just 2 of us, whatever. And Shawn would say yes. Then I go to the next person. Yeah, Shawn and myself and a couple of people getting dinner. You want to come to dinner? Susan, you're good? Okay, great. Then I go to the next person. I'd be like, Susan and Shawn are coming to dinner with me. We got 1 more seat left. Maybe you want to come? Oh, there's only 1 seat left. Can I bring my friend? Now I'd be at the tipping point. I'd be like, okay, who's your friend? Okay, yeah, you can bring him, sure. And I got 5 people. Meanwhile, I got a reservation for 8, but I'm working every seat. Now that I got 5, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I got those 5. Who's a more important person?
This is what you were doing?
Yeah. I was like, which is a more important person than the 5 I have that, higher status person that I could sell those 5 on who are interesting. And you've been at these dinners at Sundance, at the E-Tech conference. I was just always trying to work it to meet one person more important, right? And, I did that because I was always powerless as a kid, growing up. And I was scared of being poor, and I was scared of not having any power. And so when I used to come into Manhattan, I just wondered, how did these people make all this money? How did these people get power? And I studied it. And I realized your network and who you know was a proxy for money and power before you had it. Mm-hmm. And so by knowing people, that is a really good proxy. And if people like you and know you, or fear you and know you, that's really powerful. And so because I had the magazine, I had a whole bunch of people over here who loved me, who I wrote nice things about. And they weren't nice because I was trying to be nice. I just admired what they were doing. It was truthfully, these people had done great things in the world. And then there were a bunch of people over here who were done bad stuff in the world that I had written about. And I called them out for, making dopey companies like theglobe.com. So I would lose the globe.com guys because I would write how terrible their company was. But then they would actually respect me because I told the truth. The group of people who were doing good work, they respected me. And I just realized magazines are power. That was another, the dinner was a power dynamic. I realized magazines were powerful because I would look at the cover of magazines when I was in Manhattan. I would be at some cafe, and I'd be at Eureka Joe's or, a newsstand, and I'd just be looking at the covers, and I'd say, how did that person get on the cover? I'd be looking at Spy magazine, I'd see Donald Trump on the cover. Or I'd be looking at Paper magazine, and I would see Jim Jarmusch on the cover. And look at Vanity Fair, and I'd see somebody else on the cover, and I'd say, how do these people get on the cover of these magazines, right? And then I had this weird epiphany one day where I was like, well, who are these people on the masthead? Because they seem to be ranked in order of importance from the top to the bottom. And the people on the top have bigger font sizes than the people on the bottom. And the people on the top, editor-in-chief and publisher, what are those 2 different positions? Which one's more important? Is the publisher the most important, or the editor-in-chief, or the president, or the founder? I don't know. And I was trying to figure out which one in this Game of Thrones on this little tiny masthead was important. And then I just had the realization that if you pick who's on the cover, that was true power. Because those people were posing for photos to be on the cover, it mattered to them. So in my weird mind, I just figured out another hack. If I had a magazine and I picked who was on the cover, I would eventually become powerful. And that's why I started the magazine. Because I wanted to be powerful. I wanted to be known. And that was the weird behavior that people saw in me, like the spastic sometimes, or driven. So depending on how you met me, it was either charming or embarrassing. And I guess you found it charming.
I'm sure.
Somewhat embarrassing. Yeah, still here. Well, I always remember when I gave Shawn a stack of postcards for Silicon Valley Reporter, and I said, here, give your friends these, here's some postcards for it. Give them to your friends, and they can get a free year subscription. And then I got 20 cards back in one stack, and Shawn had filled them all out personally for important people in the industry. I always remember that, and sent me all 20 at once in an envelope.
Oscar Wilde says, there's no such thing as good or bad. People are either charming or tedious, and you are not tedious.
There you go. Good, I like it.
So let's talk about, let's switch a little bit to the investing side and the entrepreneur side. We have some entrepreneurs in the room. Like, if I'm an entrepreneur, what gets me a meeting with Jason Calacanis?
Sure. The easiest way to get a meeting is to have a company with a chart that has a metric that matters, that's growing 10, 20, 30% month over month. That's the easiest way. So if you have a chart of users signing up, and every month, is 10,000 people this month, and 12,000, and 18,000, and 40,000, and we're looking at it going, wow, signups are going up, I'm definitely going to read the email. If you say you have an idea, well, everybody's got an idea. So the total population of people who have ideas is the total population of humanity. So we're at 7, whatever number of billion, or whatever, 200 million Americans in adults are in the idea pool. But then if you think about the number of people who have a chart that's growing at that pace, we're talking about low hundreds of people in the world at any given point in time who haven't received a Series A. So there's about 300 or 400 people who are in my Goldilocks zone at any given point in time. So the way to get a meeting is to understand that I invest after the product launches, but before there's a Series A. Because I'm an angel investor, right? And you have to know that a Series A investor invests when you have a bunch of angel investors and you've hit 25 to 100K a month in revenue, where you have 5 to 10 million users a month.
They have to be clever enough to figure out your email.
Which is easy, jason@calacanis.com. First name at last name.
And then, obviously, if someone's introduced to you via someone you know, that's great.
That definitely increases the likelihood that you'll open the email.
What's the subject line if they don't know you that's going to get you to open it up?
Huge fan. Read your book. Like, literally, I'd say half the emails I'm getting right now are, loved your book, ... And then I open it, it's like, I loved your book. I wrote a review on Amazon. Here's a screenshot of it. I'm working on a company that does it. I was wondering if we could meet. And trust me, I'm reading every single one of those, right? So I think showing interest in other people, everybody's read that book, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People. Showing interest in the other person and understanding what they're about is critical. There's certain people are always trying to hack investors, and I think hacking investors is a bad use of resources. It's okay on the edges to do a couple little hacks here or there. Getting somebody to introduce yourself, I don't consider a major hack. I consider that just, basic strategy. But I see founders sometimes spending the majority of their time trying to convince investors, but they're spending the minority of their time in very few cycles on convincing people to use their product, or convincing a developer or a designer to be their co-founder. Those are the kind of convincing arguments you need to make before you make the convincing argument to get angel investing, I believe.
The team.
And so,
because you're looking at the team?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you mentioned, figure out your email. If you can't figure out my email or how to get in touch with me, you've disqualified yourself from being a founder. Like, if you can't find me, the biggest loudmouth in the world who has the Twitter handle Jason.
So the founder's in the room now. What are you looking for in this person who made it to the meeting? What are the characteristics you're looking for in a founder?
Yeah. I have my own rule of investing, which is, if I have a Jason's rule of investing, it's that I don't need to know if your idea is going to succeed. I need to know if you're going to succeed in life. Just need to know if you're going to succeed. Because the biggest investments I missed were because I knew the person, in all those cases, I knew the person would be tremendously successful. They had been successful. They had big signs above their head that said winner in neon. But I looked at their idea, and because I didn't believe in their idea, I basically didn't write a check, or I didn't invest, because I thought that I was smarter than them in some ways, and that I thought their idea would never work. And I've stopped trying to do that. The truth is, nobody knows which ideas are exactly going to work. And so we might as well try them. the idea that Airbnb would work is insane. When I first heard that idea, the person said to me, it's like couch surfing. Do you know what that is? I said, no. They said, well, on Craigslist, there's a couch surfing where you can ask somebody to stay on their couch. I'm like a serial killer? They're like, no. They're just like cool people who they're part of the community. And I can host somebody on my couch and get like $50. I'm like a serial killer. You can host a serial killer in your house, or a meth addict, or you can rent your house to a meth addict. And I just couldn't see it. How many people here have stayed in an Airbnb? So how many people stayed in an Airbnb in the first year Airbnb existed? So that's actually surprising. There's a good number of people. The fact is, everybody's hand went up that they've stayed in an Airbnb. How many people have hosted somebody in their home? Okay, you people are crazy. I mean, I can't see it. I'm like, you had somebody in your home who you didn't know, and they paid you money, and they didn't get out of bed in the middle of the night and stab you, and you didn't kill them, and there's not cameras everywhere. I mean, I don't get it. But I don't need to get it. I need to just be able to talk to the founder and say, what are you working on? Why will this work now? What's next? Very short questions, and I just let them talk, like Columbo does. Oh, you made the pasta? What's the vermicelli you made? And then I just let them talk, and then they eventually, they confess their crimes without even knowing it. And they just tell you exactly what they're doing. And it's usually somewhere in minutes 40 to 60 of a meeting that I understand exactly if this person...
Are there some specific flaws that you can identify?
Yeah, sure.
Even like in a very smart person you might think is a winner.
Absolutely.
Or what about, okay.
The biggest thing is focus. People get very distracted. A large number of people have some version of ADHD, ADD. I think it pairs nicely with entrepreneurship, but then it can be the downfall of an entrepreneur, because it's really nice to be looking all around to find an opportunity. But then once you find the opportunity, you have to say, oh, Airbnb works, or Uber works. Okay, Uber works in San Francisco. Now we're going to make it work in Chicago and San Francisco. It's the same thing. Just got to make it work in those two cities. Okay, these two cities work. Great, we're going to do New York and LA next, and then we're going to do Austin and Seattle, and now we're going to do Florida, and we're going to do this one, and then we're going to go over to India, and we're going to do China. And you literally are doing the same exact thing in city after city after city, day after day, executing. And very few people have the ability to shift gears from being ADD to try to find the right idea to being focused enough and being understanding and being wise enough to block out everything. There was a moment in time where Facebook had a choice to add a bunch of features to the service, like photos, or continue to roll out to other countries and languages. And that was a big debate for them, right? And they wound up pushing off photos for a little bit, getting into a couple of countries, then they turned on photos, engagement went up, and then over time they kept saying, you know what? Taking Facebook to country 90 is more important than adding features to Facebook. So in the early days of Facebook, it didn't change all that much. And all these other social networks had more bells and whistles. They supported more features. They had location. Facebook didn't have location. But they just stayed focused on the next thing. So I see a tremendous lack of focus in founders. And then it's okay to be delusional, but it's not okay to be... And it's okay to be a rule breaker, too. I mean, you have to be to a certain extent, but you have to pick your battles. And I see people who lose focus, and they fight battles that they shouldn't be fighting. And it's a very nuanced thing to be an investor now, to be 46 years old, not 26 years old in the industry, and talk to a 26-year-old about this issue. Because they're just like, I got invited to Web Summit. I'm going to Summit at Sea. I'm going to be at the Summit. I'm going to be at the Summit. Like, okay, the Summit is... the company's profitable. The summit is we get a Series A. The summit is not the Web Summit at Sea and the summit in the mountains and the summit in Dublin or Lisbon or this other Web Summit. All that stuff, TEDx Phoenix. If you're going to TEDx, that's kind of a signal that you haven't arrived. And like TED is arriving. TEDx means you haven't arrived. Like, why would you opt into that? It's kind of like you're just like saying like I don't deserve to be in the NBA. Like I should be playing in the YMCA. Like. It's a bad signal. When I see somebody puts TEDx in their bio on Twitter, I'm like, did you just put that in your bio on Twitter? Like, no offense if you have it in your... I see a lot of people like, maybe I should change that. But this lack of focus is just maddening to me because they all of a sudden get the money, they get the team player, they get the players, the customers start liking the product, and they're like, okay, I got the money, I got the team, and we have some traction. what can I do to fuck this up?
Do you ever see, just to dwell on this for one more
Yeah.
minute, do you see people over-focused? You're like, you know what? You're going to get divorced in 3 months and your life's going to fall apart and you're not going to be able to do this.
In my mind, I was thinking of answering that question. I hope so. But I don't actually hope that on anybody, but I do see it from time to time that a very successful founder will become so focused at the expense of other things in their life. I don't want to see anybody get divorced, but you do need to, if you're starting a company, have a conversation, if you are married and have a spouse and have kids, and say, hey, we're going to do it for this many years, and after this many years, and this much money invested, and this time frame, we're going to stop, and I'm going to go back to work at Google or whatever. Because I have seen marriages get strained where the spouse wasn't actually fully on board. And so you have, a wife who starts a company and a husband is like, aren't you coming home? And it's like, I told you I was starting a startup. And it's like, yeah, I told you I'm making a startup. That means I have to be here 996, which is the hours they work in China at startups. You guys have heard of 996?
No.
9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. That's what startups in China is the default. So if you work at one of those startups, you're expected explicitly to work those hours.
Oh my God. So, all right, you like the founder, you think the company's got promise. Like,
Yep.
What's the next step for you? Like, into the deal, what are you looking for? What are the terms, things you would not do without?
Generally, companies are valued from $2 to $8 million in these early stages. When they get, and that's in today's market, 2017. Back when I invested in Uber and Thumbtack, those were $4 and $5 million rounds of financing, $4 or $5 million valuations, and those companies were very good founders and very good products. Today, those same companies would probably command a $10 or $15 million valuation in this market, and then a Series A financing would typically today be more like $10 million on a $30 million valuation, or maybe $7 million on a $25 million post-money valuation. So everything has gone up a little bit. Angels have taken over the space where VCs used to exist. The venture capitalists used to give $3 or $4 million to a company, or $2 million, to see them get their product to market and get their first 100 customers. Now, angels do that, and VCs have moved downstream. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, I like to invest in companies in America. I haven't really invested internationally all that much. Getting on a plane is hard, and there are other investors there that can do it. I like to be in touch with the founders more often. And if it's in that general range of 2, 3 single-digit valuation, it's not a big deal. I like to have something called pro rata, which means if you own 1% of a company and the company raises another round of funding and they're diluting the cap table, they're adding shares, so everybody's going to get 20% dilution and you're going to go to 0.8, you have the ability to buy more shares and top off to stay at 1%. That's called pro rata.
How many angels usually get that?
I get it in every deal, or I don't do the deal. It used to be that angels didn't get it. Now people kind of demand it because they know that even if the company goes supernova like Airbnb or Uber did, you can run a syndicate to keep your shares and sell them to other people. So almost everybody can get that today. Information rights, and in my agreement, I ask people to send a monthly update. And in the book, I talk about monthly updates and how important they are for founders and investors. In my early days, I tried to convince people of monthly updates. Now it's a contractual requirement. I will not do a deal if the founder does not agree to send a monthly short update.
Why do you ask for that? I mean, obviously, is there anything besides just knowing what's going on?
If the founder has to sit and reflect every 30 days, they are going to be focused on what matters. Because you don't want to write that email and have nothing change from the last time you wrote it. So it's this moment in time where you're stopping and considering what have you accomplished and what are you going to accomplish. You're taking inventory. If you don't have the ability to stop for half an hour to take inventory and then 15 minutes to write an email, and it's 1 hour total, for the people who've backed you, you've got something wrong as a founder. Like you don't get it. And people say, I'm super busy. Well, short is fine. You can write a short email. And in that email, knowing when the company's going to run out of money and what they anticipate their funding needs will be, how many months of runway they have, what they've accomplished, and what their asks are, putting in the bottom of the email, hey, we're looking for a CFO, we're looking for a developer, we need a new office space. Those requests typically get filled by the investors if you ask them. So, and it also increases by at least 5x the chances of the existing investors participating in a future round. And if you don't do it, it decreases almost universally the chances of raising money when things aren't going well. So a lot of times things will not go well in a startup. Yeah. More often than not, it doesn't go well.
Talk about some of like the red flags that you see once the company's operating.
Well, not sending updates is the biggest, because if you don't get an update for 6 months, in all likelihood the company's going out of business, or it's a tremendous success. But 99 times out of 100, it's because it's going out of business. Another thing is when you see this lack of focus, and they're talking about soft metrics and things that will not impact what matters in a company. So I have speaking gigs. I won this startup competition. We're going to be at this conference. We got this press. These things are all soft, feel-good moments, but
they're nice along the way.
They're nice. Yeah, but what I've learned is, the press is this weird hall of mirrors. Like, they can make you look taller than you are, they can make you look fatter than you are, they can, make your voice squeaky or deep or whatever. All this, the press can distort reality for a founder. And I've seen many companies just get extraordinary press and have no traction. I've seen companies with massive traction getting no press. And so what matters is the traction and listening to the customers. And I can't tell you how many times I'll meet with a founder and say, well, they say, what should we do? And I say, okay, what do you think you should do? And they start talking about it, and I say, have you talked to your customers? Have you run a test? So we don't know if people are going to be willing to take a delivery charge for Instacart. I'm like, okay, there's a pretty easy way to test this. How are you going to test it? I don't know, send 100 people a note that starting next month you're going to have a delivery charge of $5 and see what happens. And Instacart started charging a delivery charge at a monthly fee of $10, and all of a sudden their business went from having, from what I understand, I'm not an investor, this negative unit economics where for every time, they were selling $100 bills for $80, you're going to get a lot of customers. When they changed their pricing a little bit, it became sustainable and the company became attractive to investors again. So, being able to confront the hard truths is critical. And I think a lot of people would rather not get the update, including some investors, and not write the update saying what's hard. I always tell people when I invest in them, I would like you to promise me that two things. One, when things are truly hard and you can't tell your board or your investors and you can't tell your employees because the board will kick you out as CEO and the founder and your team will quit because they're scared that you're a weak leader or that things aren't working out. In that moment, I want you to call me on my cell phone and let's talk it out and let's get coffee. The second thing I asked them for is if this fails, when you have your next idea, you have to promise me that I'm the first phone call. And those phone calls have started coming in now in year 6 or 7 of me investing. And literally I'm on my second investment with 4 founders where I invested in their company 5 or 6 years ago. They either lost my money or got a single or double, in one case a triple. And I'm investing in their new companies. Again, if I know you're, back to Jason's law of angel investing, I don't need to know if your idea is going to succeed. I need to know if you're going to succeed. If I know they're a winner, and I invested in them once, and they learned a lot, and they returned 1, 2, 3x the money, or 0, so why wouldn't I bet on them again? Travis's third company was Uber. His first was Scour, his second was Red Swoosh, and then his third was Uber. Scour got sued out of existence.
I remember.
Red Swoosh sold for 1 or 2 times what they raised, so it's probably a double. And that was the first 10 years of his career. And then the third is history. And this happens over and over again. Elon Musk did Zip2 and PayPal, $100 million exit, $1.5 billion exit.
100 million is the Elon Musk single. It's a bunt.
I think that's that's like blinking his eyes. And now he's got a $60 billion company, right? Like Tesla or whatever. So, I think you want to monitor and keep those relationships going with founders.
How important is loyalty? And can you talk about loyalty? You've talked about loyalty, since I've known you. Can you I guess evaluate it in a founder?
Sure. Yeah, I think over time you can. I mean, loyalty is as loyalty does, right? Like, you can just judge people by their actions. You don't really have to think about it too much. I think one of the most loyal things you can do is when your friends are having truly bad times, is to call them on the phone. And what I've learned over my life is that when people have truly hard times, their friends don't actually call them. They're like, ooh, that's so uncomfortable. God, things have gone so terrible for that person. Hey, probably should just give them some space. It's actually the opposite. I actually think you're supposed to call. And so this is the way I was brought up, is that if something goes wrong, you just go to your friend and you immediately show up for them. And so I immediately show up for people if I see they're having some hard time. If I hear a friend is getting a divorce or shutting down a company, or they lost a key employee, or they made a boneheaded mistake and their company's being sued, that's when that's my call to action. And so when Uber was having a lot of problems, I called Travis and the team over there and I said, how can I help? And I'm going to be on CNBC next week and the 2 weeks after that, because I do it every other week. If you want me to, I'll talk about the situation. Let me know. And they said, really? Okay, great, because everybody else wants to duck and not talk about the hard issues. Well, the hard issues are the moment in time where you get to show your loyalty. And it's very easy to high-five somebody when they take their company public or they sell it. Everybody can pop champagne corks in the club and high-five each other, and that's all great and well and good. But when things are dark and you show up for people and it's like, yep, nobody else is here, that's when it matters, I think. And so I put a lot of value into loyalty. And what happens in your life is, if you do that, you get rewarded with it, because people realize that you're actually putting a concerted effort into being loyal. And it's not that I make a lot of mistakes. You know that. You've known me for a long time. And when I make mistakes, I think about it. I say, could I have done better? Could I have been more loyal? Could I have been a better friend? Could I have been a better investor? And I'll just tell people, I think I could have done better. I'm sorry. And I've had that conversation a couple times in the last couple years where I look back and I go, you know what? In 2017, I would have done this differently. I would have worked harder. I would have been there for the person. And so I think that's actually another way to show loyalty, is to go backwards, and when you weren't loyal or when you weren't your best self, to go tell the person, I could have done better for you. And that really breeds a level of loyalty that is lifelong.
Save. It's a save, right?
It's a save, yeah.
Do you have any stories of when people, like founders, were not loyal and they screwed you, and
gosh.
figuratively or literally would be a good story?
Yeah, it's happened. There's really two categories. I've been actively screwed, and then I've had people lie to me and caught them. There's really two categories. And I think it was interesting.
Any anecdote without?
Yeah, I think names? In the book, it was interesting. It's my first book, and HarperCollins published it. They're a great publisher, and they said they loved the book. When they got the manuscript, they were overjoyed. They're like, "Oh my God, it's actually a good book." And I was like, "I'm a writer. It should be good, right?" They were like, "Yeah, no, we're just." I was like, "Are you surprised?" They're like, "Kind of. Kind of wanted you to use a ghostwriter." But anyway, they were like, these 17 people you mentioned are probably going to sue you, so should we change these names? And I was like, okay, so we changed the names, which was very unlike me. My initial instinct was, well, let the chips fall where they may. And then I was like, you know what? There's no reason to beat a person who made a mistake down. Like when as a journalist, I actually kind of felt like that was my job. But in writing a book, that's a retrospective. When you are a journalist, I think you have to really be hard-hitting and tell the truth. It's your obligation. You can't sugarcoat it. But in a book, I think I could blend out the names. And one that happened, that was particularly bad, was I had somebody I was going to invest in, and they had done very well at my conference, the Launch Festival. And they told me Google and Facebook were their clients. I said, you got Google and Facebook already? They said, yep. I said, that's amazing. Great. Let's talk after the conference. So I agreed to invest. And then we started due diligence, and my chief of staff at the time, Bryce, asked them for the contracts for Google and Facebook, just to understand, was this a pilot or 3 months or 3 years, and what the dollar amount were. And the guy said, Well, we don't actually have a written contract. We have a verbal agreement. So my chief of staff comes back and says, they don't have written contracts for either Facebook or Google. They have verbal agreements with both. I said, okay, ask them who the verbal agreements are. And my chief of staff comes back, you're not going to like it, boss. They want to talk to you on the phone. I talked to him on the phone. He says, well, we met somebody at a cocktail party, met this other person at a conference, and they both said that they would like to try it. So they're not actually customers, but we're... Anyway, long story short, I write the story in the book, and I backed out of investing because in due diligence, I found out they had lied to me. And literally, a week after the book comes out, I get an apology letter from that CEO. And it just says, apology to Jason Calacanis. And I read the thing, and he said, I was so enthusiastic about having you as an investor that, this is the first time I'm telling this story, because in the book I tell the story, that I jumped the gun, but I wanted to let you know that 18 months later, we did in fact get Facebook and Google to do a pilot. And here are the contracts. And he attached the contracts with a bunch of mark out and said, it was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life, and I just want to make it right with you and let you know that whatever.
Sounds like your strategy.
And it was exactly my strategy. Yeah, it was exactly like, it was like, wow, that's pretty good. And then another time, I told a story in the book. So that one was like, just, I look back on it and I think, good for me for not, for doing due diligence. And I actually think it wouldn't have been a great investment because if somebody is not tight like that, there's going to be other things that'll be loosey-goosey. I appreciate the apology, obviously. But another time, I had a founder who wanted me to be an advisor, chased me down. I went to lunch with him. He gave me 1% of the company over 2 years to be an advisor. I was an advisor, and I tell a story in the book, and he's making incredible progress with his startup, and I helped him, and I introduced him to everybody, and then some VC comes in and does the round, and then says, we're cleaning up the cap table, and we see you're an advisor, but that's too many shares, so we're canceling your advisor agreement. I said, well, you can't cancel it. I've already earned 80% of it, and it's vested. And then they said, well, you don't have, we're canceling it. You can sue us. And I said to the guy, I can't sue a founder, especially not over, what's probably $40,000 or $50,000 in shares. The company's worth $50 million. This is $500,000 in shares. A lawsuit would cost double that or triple that, and then I would have on the record that I sued a founder over shares. Like, why don't we just settle this? And the person was like, sorry, and then the CEO never called me back, and I was just like, wow, if you would screw your earliest advisors and you will allow a VC to screw me, I just told the VC, that's fine. Anytime any investor, anytime any founder asks me if they should work with you, I'm going to tell them exactly what I think, and I have. And so, I didn't fight that. I didn't fight it because I just thought to myself, God, I've been so lucky in the rest of my life that to spend time fighting over this $500,000 equity package, even if it goes 10x and becomes worth $5 million, the amount of reputation damage I would have and the amount of energy I would expend to fight this. But in my earlier days, I would have fought it, but I just said, this is not worth it. It's just too much negative energy. And I wrote the story in the book, and my hope would be that the founder eventually reads it, or I'm sure people have told him, and that he just comes back and says, yeah, I shouldn't have done that.
What about, so that's actually a good lead-in for, like, you're an angel, and then you have maybe, not for you, but for other people, some sharky venture guys coming in. How do you protect yourself in that situation as the angel, and any scenarios that you need to look out for?
Yeah, so the number one thing is having a great relationship with the founder, and having a great attorney is number two. You need to have a great attorney, and you have to be able to read the documents. And reading the documents is arduous. When you become a super professional angel, you're going to have the ability to hire lawyers to do it and explain it to you. When you're starting out, you're going to have to read it yourself and start to understand it, maybe have some friends show you, and maybe have an attorney, sure, but it could get expensive quick. And you're just going to want to understand the protective provisions and some of those downside provisions. And when they ask you to sign the new documents, if you're directly investing, you just have to talk to the founder and say, hey, I noticed that the new VCs want to get rid of pro rata. I would like to keep my pro rata. Obviously, I was an early investor. What's the thinking here? And we would be okay with doing the deal, but we want to make sure that we have our pro rata in the future, because sometimes the VC will come along and try to remove the pro rata rights, or remove the information rights, or remove these other provisions. So being able to read the documents, taking the time to read the documents, and having a great relationship with the founder. And so in one case, a VC tried to screw me and rip up my side letter and get rid of my board seat option, get rid of my pro rata provisions and my information rights. And paradoxically, the venture capitalist was a friend of mine, or friendly with me. I just consider them a friend. And they said, you know, Jason, we're going to do this round. It's going to be great. But, you know, when I came into the venture industry, I had to eat shit a bunch. And I said, let me stop you right there. I don't know who told you, but Jason Calacanis does not eat shit. And I'm not going to let you rip up my provisions. And in fact, I'm going to take your term sheet, and I'm going to take the founder, and I'm going to take him to these other 5 venture firms personally. And I'm going to show them how many billion-dollar companies those venture capitalists have, and then explain to him that you have none. And then I'm going to explain to him that you want to damage my rights, and what does he think will happen to him next?
Nice.
And the person was like, oh, well, you know, I think it's unreasonable, but let me think about it over the weekend. I went back to the founder. I said, we're going to start having board meetings, initiating my board seat, going to have sushi with you, let's get together. And I just put myself even closer to the founder. I explained the dynamic to the founder, and I said, listen, you can't let people run over your people who've been loyal to you for the last 2 years, putting myself out of it, but even the other angels. If you take the people who got you to here and you screw them over, what do you think the next group of people is going to do to you? You're going to create a culture of everybody screwing each other over. It's going to be Game of Thrones. And you know what? It doesn't end well. I hate to spoil it for everybody, but if you think it ends well, you have not been paying attention. It does not end well. Everybody's dying. Every week, people die. Like, this is the show we've chosen to watch. And so, you know, you have to fight that kind of cultural infection that can happen in a company.
Did the VC end up investing?
VC wound up emailing me the next day saying, sorry, I'm going to change my position on this, and we've had a very successful relationship since then. So I think sometimes, you know, there's fighting, and then there's just, as you gain more power in the ecosystem, which I have, in the early days I had to fight or just get my ass kicked, or both. And then now I can take a little bit of a different tact, which is just be like, you know what? I'm the point guard. I bring the ball up the court. You're a venture capitalist. I'm never going to pass you the ball. But those other 3 guys on the team, I'm going to pass the ball to them. Their stats are going to be amazing. You're never going to touch the ball again. Do you want to be in that position? Because if I hit 6 unicorns and 150 investments, that's about 1 every 25. And I actually hit those 6 in the first 100. So it's kind of like 1 every 20 or 15 or whatever. You really don't want to be in a position where the mother of unicorns does not want to pass you the ball.
Yeah.
Like, I have dragons. Do you want the dragons or no? You want the dragons on your team, or you want the dragons on the other person's team? Like, this is, and when you explain it to people like that, you can, I think, mitigate against it. But, you know, you have to. I hate fighting, but I don't mind standing up for myself. I used to love fighting.
Yeah, I believe that. I remember.
And now I don't. Yeah, I don't enjoy the fight as much because it just takes a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm trying to use my time wisely. And fighting is not a wise use of time. It is when you're scrapping to try to get in, but once you're inside the tent, there's no reason to start a fight once you're in the tent. You made it in. So I'm in the tent now. I'm accepted. I'm the, you know, arguably the 5th or 6th best angel investor of all time, and I still have 150 investments left to do. So I don't have to fight about it anymore. But you cannot let somebody disrespect you and remove your rights. So you have to know when you've arrived. I think that's another thing that some founders don't get right, is when you've won, you have to be magnanimous in victory. And you see some people win, and they win big, and then they do not change their strategy of how to get to the next level.
We have, what's our timing? Do we have,
questions? Okay, great.
5 minutes. Well, okay, does anybody have some burning questions?
Here, I'll bring the microphone to you.
All right. I'm going to let our host pick the questions.
Hi, formal mentorship for when you're starting out in your investing career, is it overrated or underrated? It's just jump in and figure it out yourself, kind of how you did, or formal mentoring?
Yeah, if you can find investors to co-invest with. That's the best mentorship, and to go take and have lunch with them. The reason I wrote the book is because I do get a lot of questions. How do I break into this? So it's sort of a playbook. And in the book, I talk about, hey, make your first 10 investments in a small way. Then look at those 10 investments, find out who your 10 to 20 co-investors are, put them into a Google Sheet or whatever CRM system you use. Then email those, let's say you have 20 people who have co-invested in the 10 deals. You have 200 contacts in your network. Email those 200 a simple sentence, which is what I did in the early days. Have you seen any interesting companies? Question mark. And you would obviously send the first one. We're co-investors in Uber. Would love to get coffee when I'm in San Francisco next. By the way, have you seen any interesting companies? And then you wouldn't believe how many people reply to that. And they reply to it with 4 companies. And all of a sudden now you have a network. Then you tell them what you're investing in, and now all of a sudden you are becoming a rainmaker for your founders, right? And it's that simple. But people don't take this very simple step.
Hi, thanks for being here today. I love the podcast, especially the Angel series that you've been doing as of recently. You talk about Thumbtack in the early days when you met a founder there. We have a marketplace for event professionals. I'm just curious, what kind of metrics do you look for at now and marketplaces or market networks? And also, if there is a movie, I hope you get credit for Uber taking away the cab part.
Thank you. Yeah. There's definitely going to be a movie after what's happened in the last 2 months. I can tell you that. I think Rick Schroeder might be good.
Ricky Schroeder.
No, Rick. He goes by Rick now.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, he dropped the Ricky. He got rid of the Y. Yeah, so marketplaces generally are very hard to balance, right? Because you have to have supply and demand. Sometimes you have a 3-sided marketplace, which is even more complex. So what you'd be looking for as an investor, what I would be looking for, is maybe 6 or 12 months of data, and the founders understanding how to manage supply, demand, and even if there's 3 parties, right? Because you might have multiple parties involved in a transaction. For an example, Uber Eats has the restaurant, the consumer of the food, and the driver, right? And Uber. So there's like 4 players involved in this. One's running the marketplace and 3 other people who are getting some value out of the marketplace. So you understanding your marketplace and showing growth in either side of your marketplace for 6 to 12 months, and then repeatability is a really important thing for you to focus on in a marketplace. If it's a marketplace for funerals and people die one time, you got a little bit of an issue. Or marriage, right? People get married once or twice. That's why companies like The Knot have become collections of sites. So they have The Knot and they have babies, and other stuff. So you have to understand repeatability. And if you show repeatability and you can have 10 customers that you can talk to for a dog walking service, and the people are not going to your marketplace, finding a dog walker, and then leaving and starting a direct relationship with the dog walker, then you have repeatability. So how do you do that? You put insurance in the marketplace, so the person who's walking the dog says, it's worth giving 10% because I'm covered by insurance, or it's worth giving 10% because they constantly send me new clients and I get reviews and I'm building up my reviews. So why do Airbnb people don't leave the marketplace and Uber drivers don't leave Uber? Because they're constantly getting new customers and the tools that they've built make them happy.
Hi, I had a question about the startup ecosystem, what your thoughts are on the startup ecosystem LA compared to San Francisco, because, trying to improve the ecosystem here.
Yeah. So I'm a big proponent of New York, LA as markets. I've lived in both those cities, 10 years here and 30 years in New York, before living the last 3 years in San Francisco. And I may come back down here at some point. So I think the ecosystem here is wonderful. As an investor, if you are investing in New York, LA primarily, your returns will not be anywhere near as good as if you're investing in San Francisco and the Bay Area, because historically the best outcomes have come out of that area. That doesn't mean innovation will not come from other areas. You have Snap here worth 15 or 20 billion or 5, who knows? It's probably, if it was at 5 billion right now, there'd be a line of people around the corner trying to buy it. If it's valued at 15, people are thinking it's too expensive.
Can we claim SpaceX as a LA startup?
Of course, SpaceX is a huge one. And so, innovation can happen anywhere. A great entrepreneur can build a great company in a lot of different locations. All that being said, if you're an investor, you got to do it up here. And what really matters is that the people in the ecosystem continue to operate in that ecosystem, and they build a community. So the SpaceX and Snap and Dollar Shave Club employees should be, and the senior team members should go on to become investors or start other companies, like the MySpace alumni did. But what I saw in LA a lot was people would make a ton of money and then they would just pull the ripcord and they'd be out. And so that's bad. So you need to have companies at scale. Because if only 3 people got rich and they all leave the ecosystem because they've made so much money, that's bad. What you need is those tweeners. You need to have a company like Google or Facebook where you have 1,000 millionaires come out or 5,000 millionaires, and some 10% of them, 20% of them say, I want to pay it forward, I want to be a mentor, I want to invest in companies. That's the secret of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And that's actually started to happen here, and it's happened certainly in New York, where someone like Kevin Ryan went on to invest in 3 or 4 companies, Business Insider, he did a CDN, he did the Gilt Group. He had done DoubleClick and made a ton of money. Eric Hippo had been the CEO of Ziff Davis, and then he and Lear Hippo both invested in Huffington Post, and then they did another fund where they've invested in BuzzFeed and other companies. So you need to have that transition, and I'm an example of that transition. I started as an entrepreneur, and now I'm an angel investor. So hopefully LA gets a little of that going. I would say LA is right behind New York and Boston and Seattle, or in that cohort. And the way to do it is really to support each other and help each other's companies grow, and even start an angel group here. Have a group of 25 people get together who all want to put $3,000 into a deal, and all of a sudden you've got $75,000, and you do it through a special purpose vehicle, and all of a sudden you just decide these 25 angels are going to make 4 investments a year locally. That's totally fine. You may not get the returns that you would get, but you get the enjoyment of helping the local ecosystem.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Wendy. I live in Venice. Venice is home of Snapchat, and it's not really well received in the community. And I just wanted to, if you know anything about what's going on with Snapchat, I'd love to hear. I know I heard that it went down like 70%, and they're not really what they say they are either. A lot of the perception is that they're something more like Instagram, but they're actually listed as a camera company. If you go to, I forget.
Correct.
Where,
Yeah.
And they seem to be buying up a lot of property.
Yeah. So NIMBYism is the bane of existence for a lot of popular places, Venice being one, and in the Bay Area, there's a huge movement of not in my backyard. What happens if we don't have a progressive view of housing is people start buying alternative housing and doing interesting things with it. So Snap, because they can't get office space and want to be in Venice and they won't let them build a tower or a big campus, is going to buy up spaces. The same thing happened in Palo Alto with Palantir, and we're seeing it all over the Bay Area. And it's a real problem. It's a quagmire because what's going to happen is, and the best argument I've heard against this, and to get people to get out of that not in my backyard moment, and I lived in Brentwood, so I understand the NIMBY movement really well because we had it there, is you have to convince people your kids and your grandkids are not going to be able to live near you unless you open up real estate and allow more units to be built, and more units help. So whether it's commercial or residential, we just have to be willing to build more units or build better transportation. And this town has gotten a little bit better on transportation, but not much better on units, right? Santa Monica is still very NIMBY. Yeah. So I don't blame Snap for it wholeheartedly, but it is. I could see it being very frustrating if you live in Venice to have that happen. But it's progress, and the upside of gentrification or this kind of corporate takeover is that whoever the real estate holders are, their value of their real estate is going 5 or 10x. So the logical thing to do is to go to the town over, which is Mora Vista or Culver City, and just buy a property now, because it's going to spread if we've learned anything.
Hi, Jason. My name is Les, and I'm wondering if, hypothetically, the stock market has a major downturn in the next 6 months, how would that affect the angel investing or the startup companies, and
Yeah.
I'm not aware of how they were affected, say, in 2007 when we had the big downturn then.
Yeah, and in after 9/11 and after the dot-com boom bust cycle in 2000, it's pretty horrific because affluent people lose half their wealth. They stop angel investing. It's a recreational thing to do. So it's like the first thing to go, just like billboards for advertisers. It's like the first thing they can cut is the angel investing. And then the terms become predatory. If you need to raise money for your startup, you maybe ask for a liquidation preference or you have a down rounds. So it would be disastrous. And people are very concerned about the stock market right now and what's happening with Trump. So it's quite possible if he's not able to pass the legislation around stimulus and tax, which seems like a growing possibility. He'll still get something done, but probably, who knows with this president, that could be a 20 or 30% haircut immediately if he can't get those things done. So I've dialed back my equities.
Final question.
Yeah, can you describe a competitive deal you won and what value add you gave to the founder other than capital?
Sure. One that comes to mind was a company called Swell, which Apple bought, which was a podcasting company. And I have a podcast. And they had closed their round of funding. And I said, I would have liked to have invested. And they said, we closed the round. And I said, well, why don't you ask the investors, since you're pursuing me to be a partner, if I can invest $250,000. And they said, but we closed it. I said, so you could open it. And, like things open and they close, but you can open them again. It's like, there's another word. Like, you didn't say permanently closed. It's closed right now, so let's open it. So I asked them to open it, and they did. I put $250,000 in, and it was Google and DFJ were the investors. And they went to them. They're like, Jason will be involved? Yeah, if he tweets and he's a podcaster, he's influential, he'll have value. So we went on this incredible journey together for 9 months. They sold the company to Apple. I made $150,000 in 9 months, and it was the worst day of my life. Like, it was literally horrific, because I was like, guys, why are we selling the company? If Apple wants to buy the company, we're onto something. Let's 10x it. Let's 20x it. That's really one of the most frustrating parts about being an investor, is that you're not always aligned with your founders. For me, doubling my money on an investment is just brutal. It's like, it's just the worst thing that could possibly happen. Or especially, and even worse is like when you do 5x, because
it's worse than losing money.
It's worse. If you lost money, you know that there was no possibility it was going to work. It's like an easy experiment. Like, this experiment didn't work. We put this flavor with this flavor. It was terrible. But if it works enough for Google or Apple to buy the company for 5 times, that means they would have bought it for 50 times if we were just 10 times bigger. So why don't we keep working? Because there's an unlimited pile of capital here. But sometimes the founders have a chance to take $10 million off the table personally, and it's just too compelling. So you can't fight them on it. But then I go back to that rule. If you sell your company, and I was an investor in the last one, I have to be your first phone call, right? We talked about it. They say, yep, okay, great. And then I'll get you on the next one, and we'll build it bigger next time.
All right.